Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome back. Now, how's that for a cool thumbnail? The reflection of everything in the screen, including my iPhone as continuity camera for doing this video. So, will Mac OS come to the iPad Pros? Well, it's not going to come to the non-Pro ones, that's for sure. But to the Pros, it's supposed to come to the M2 chip at least. And we do have the M1 version as well. And I haven't really looked at the actual specs on that one, but my M2 chip, it's the same as what's sitting in an M2 MacBook Air, which is 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 16-core neural engine, 8 gigabytes of RAM as a base configuration because of the smaller drive. Now, if you're working with a 128, 256, or 512 in this iPad Pro 4th Gen, you're only getting 8 gigs of RAM. If you go to the 1 or 2 terabyte version for storage, you get 16 gigs of RAM. iOS doesn't chew up that much RAM. Neither do the programs that we run generally. They don't really chew up a lot of RAM. So why do we need all this RAM? Maybe preparation for Mac OS going on, perhaps? And being that Apple's been experimenting with this for quite some time, and there's been a lot of talk all over the internet and leakers and this and that saying, yeah, it's coming, and and there's mock-ups of what the interface could look like, which I think we're all going to get a big surprise. But one of the mock-ups looks like something from the days of OS 9, okay? And it's like, oh, that's kind of neat. Very archaic, but I don't think that's going to happen. The other mock-up I've seen actually looks like OS 10, right? Or in this case, Mac OS 14, because not much has really changed there with the Windows. So either way, it's going to be Mac OS related, right? Now, will we be able to run actual Mac OS apps on there? Well, some say yes, some say no, some say quite possibly. But they're also saying it's going to have to be a stripped down version of the Mac OS only because the Mac OS chews up a lot of space, right? And so do the programs, especially when you get something even like Logic that's fully decked out. That gets pretty big, right? Now, we do have Logic Pro, obviously, now on the iPad. We also have Final Cut Pro as well, and DaVinci Resolve, which I have DaVinci Resolve on my iPad. It's a 100% free version, Mac or iOS, so don't pay attention to in-app purchases when you're downloading for the iOS, because that's only if you're going to go to the paid version, which is the studio version. The free version is still 100% free, 100% fully functional. It just has about 3 features that are not available in the free version that will be when you actually purchase the program. Okay, and some people really want those features, so they'll pay for it, where others like me, I could care less. It's not hurting me. So yeah, I'm fine with the free version, even on my Mac, so good to go. Anyhow, I've got it installed, I fired it up, but I haven't really played with it yet. But there's been a lot of complaints, obviously, about iOS and why people want to see Mac OS on an iPad. They want better navigation. I mean, navigating around Mac OS is like child's play, right? But navigating on an iPad, even at the best of times, really sucks. Trying to get at your files and few other little tidbits about it. It's like, if we had Mac OS, this would be so much simpler and easier. And so people have been crabbing for years, actually, as it is, to get Mac OS into the iPad. But Apple is not going to support any of the iPads below the Pro. And it's only going to be Pro iPads that have, for sure, the M2 chip, maybe M1. Because like I said, some people say it's only going to be M2 and above chips. It's not going to be on an M1. It's kind of like with Apple going into AAA gaming on the Mac. They are seriously putting a lot of effort into full-out AAA gaming, but only on M2s and above. On the M1s, they're great performing machines, but on the gaming side of things, from what we've seen for performance levels, even on some stuff that's now native Apple Silicon, they're not going to concentrate that much on the M1s, because they've already gotten rid of the M1s pretty well anyways, other than what you can still find on an Apple refurbished store. Or, of course, that iMac M1 is still available until they replace it. And they still have the M1 MacBook Air 8-core by 7-core but we don't even know why they still have that, because they got rid of the M1 MacBook Pro completely, the Touch Bar one. They ditched off the 14 and 16 inches, other than the refurbished store. So it's kind of like, well, why did they even bother to keep the Air? And they do have a 13-inch Air M2, right? And it's kind of like, well, wasn't that the whole point of everything else getting replaced? Like, you could have just gave us a 13-inch M2 Air for $1,300, because they still want $1,300 for something that's already 3 years old, right? The 2020, because they didn't make a 2021 MacBook Air, okay, in the same configuration, right? They went from an M1 to an M2, period. And the M2 is a 8x10 core in the higher tier. So it's kind of like, well, I'm not sure. But that's Apple for you. They do some really strange, funky stuff. But as far as putting Mac OS on this goes, I'm looking forward to seeing how it works, because there's so many theories and ideas, and some of these things may come to being happening, right? But I think we're going to find that it's going to have to be a very stripped down version of Mac OS. So I think there's going to be some limitations to that, definitely, for sure. So I wouldn't think that we would be able to take something like a full installable application that's huge and be able to put it on there, especially if you only had 128 gig of storage or 256. And Apple's not going to force you to go to 512 or 1 terabyte iPads. I can't see that happening, because that would just be, really not a cool thing for them to do. They'd lose a lot of favor among iPad users real quick, especially those who actually want the Mac OS on there. But if they are successful regardless with this, and it does work well, I could see them putting it into the Mac laptop range. They would have to have a new range of laptops that have touch capability, as well as the iMac would have to have it, which means you're not going to see it in the M3 iMac. You'd probably see it like in an M4 or an M5, right? Same as when you go to the laptops. It's not going to happen with M3s. It's going to be into an M4 and M5, where you're going to have touch capability on those computers, so that you can have touch, because a lot of people want a touch-based OS. So, but even that, I'm really not sure how that's going to work out, okay? They won't be able to do anything about Mac Minis, Studios, or Mac Pro Towers having touch, because that would require specialized ports for the video output. It's going to require a specialized screen that's capable of touch. And there's nothing on the third-party market right now, even for screens, that I'm aware of at least, that even have touch for a PC on that screen. I know that there are touch screen laptops, there are touch screen all-in-one desktops, but I've never heard tell of an actual display that you can just buy and throw on a computer and have touch capability as part of that feature of that screen, if your computer supports that kind of thing, right? So there's going to be a lot going on in the next while. But some people are also saying as early as this September, we should have that new Mac OS going on to the iPad. But of course, at the same time, none of us can understand why we can't just take our iPad, take Ventura, put it in there, it's Type-C, boot the sucker up, and then, tell it to install. Other than the fact that we're locked out by firmware that prevents that. Same thing as you can't format a drive under iOS, you should be able to under Mac OS. Once it comes to iPad, you should be able to format drives, easier navigation. It should look and feel like a Mac, is the whole idea of doing this. Otherwise, what's the point if it's not going to be that way? So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it works. I'm hoping that it kind of works just like a normal everyday Mac, but on your iPad. That'll be kind of cool. It'd also be cool to have the option to switch between Mac OS and iOS, basically like a startup device kind of thing, right? So on a 128 gig machine, basically I would probably say, cut the drive in half. 64 gigs for this, 64 gigs for that, have fun and party on. And if you don't like it, just undo it all and go straight back to iOS if you want to. There should be those options, and I don't know how those options are going to work. But even if you had a 256 drive, same thing, slice it in half. 512, slice it in half, and kind of like, running boot camp with Windows, right? That's kind of the way Apple should set it up with this, is to have that same thing where you can run just a pure iOS or fire up this app, download Ventura or whatever, next OS, Sonoma, whatever it is, and just flip it around that way, and then just choose which way you want to start up with whichever OS, and then give the options of full-blown applications on Mac side, and just your regular apps on the iOS side, but still having that ability for touch on the Mac OS side. I don't know. We'll have to figure out how it comes down when it comes down. It'll be interesting one way or another to see how it all works. But when it's going to come out, I personally don't think it's going to come out this year, because I think they still got a lot more work to do, especially if the rumors and leaks are true that they've only been at this for maybe 1 or 2 years. I think they're still a little ways off from getting this thing to work correctly. I mean, as it is right now, I did a video earlier today for you guys about hooking a display up to the iPad, and there's a lot of programs that just don't want to play game, okay, where others do, but then to get the others to play game, you have to do this. And then you have the no sound problem that we have to fix, which I gave you guys a cure for that. That would definitely work without having to have a Bluetooth speaker, because this is something where nobody on the Apple forums has figured anything out. But I saw a video this morning of a lady using an iPad, and she's, her thing was, use a Bluetooth speaker, you get your sound back. That was fine. But then, of course, the other problem you have with this was, let's say you want to go watch a YouTube video. You have to actually click on the video screen part where you're watching in order to activate sound. Otherwise, you have no sound. And you have no sound coming out of your speakers, and you can't get that back either, of your built-in speakers, which, when you think about it, you plug a connector in here, an adapter, that's going out to HDMI or DisplayPort, right, cable. It should leave the speakers alone because it's an iPad, right? No, it shuts them off. And your sound control panel is not helping you turn them back on either. And I kind of love the sound of these 4 speakers combined, right? But, so I had to find another solution. And your screen may or may not have a headphone jack or a speaker jack, right? And even if your screen has built-in speakers, you may not have access to those speakers, okay, which is another problem, right? Mind you, the sound will go through the HDMI cable, so if you do have built-in speakers, you would think you'd be all right. But even people are having trouble with TV sets, which have built-in speakers. So it's kind of like, how do we do this now, right? So on a straight regular monitor, my monitor, neither one of them have built-in speakers, but they both do have speaker output jacks, so it does go through the HDMI. Same as my Mac Mini, it goes through the HDMI, and I have to make sure I select headphone jack so it can output it from there to where I have to connect my Mini to in order to get my sound through the rest of my setup, right? So it's kind of one of those things, but we don't get any of those access points on the iPad, when we hook up an external screen. So we have to do things other ways, which I have 2 solutions. Check out the video. But also check out the video too, mainly to see what works and what doesn't work and how much of a problem this can be, which hopefully Mac OS going onto the iPad will actually make it more like a regular computer too, for usability. Because, that's what a lot of people want, is less and less space being taken up. And I mean, I've got this, and then I've got a stand kicking around here. And I've got this stand. Now, there are a lot of cases that have built-in stands. I went with the ESR. But I've got this stand, so I can put it in a, normal screen mode, hook a keyboard and mouse via Bluetooth, and it's like a like a laptop, really, in a sense, right? Except no Mac OS on here right now. That's the only part that sucks. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this works, or how well it's going to even work, and how much other kind of headaches we have to put up with in the meantime, because you can bet there's going to be a lot of bug fixes they have to do. And we have not even seen a beta release of this yet for iPad, which has got me suspicious that we're not going to see it this year, because we would need to see a beta release first, because Apple always does a beta release, right? They do it on Mac OS and they do it on the iOS, so we haven't seen a pre-release yet. So I don't think we're going to see it this September like a lot of people are thinking we will. I think maybe next year, probably. That would be about my idea. But hey, we could all get a big surprise and Apple does something out of the norm, and voila, you're going to have it this year. Look, and we didn't even give the beta testers a chance to mess with stuff. Anyways, that's pretty much about what I've got going on this. I hope it comes to the iOS devices, like the M2. Hopefully they don't leave out the M1 people, but they probably will. But I really like to see it Mac OS as a touch version, at least starting with iPads. See how well it's going to work, and is it going to be something that's going to be usable for everybody, you know? Because I know Apple's not going to do anything that could damage the sales of their regular computers, and this is a very powerful tablet having this M2 chip in here, you know, and they're only going to get faster and faster all the time, right, with these things. So I don't see Apple ever ditching laptops, but I also don't see them putting up a fully functional everyday what we're used to Mac OS onto something like this, because then people would just go out and buy iPads and they wouldn't even bother with laptops or desktops anymore, you know, because they would figure, oh, I can just hook a hub on here, which I've seen people hook hubs already with, you know, all these extra devices and stuff, and it's like, yeah, and then you get the capability of the pen on here, you know, and or pencil, and the pencils for your drawing and stuff. I think that's great too, you know. So I think, you know, Apple's not going to cut their own foot off on this one. They're going to have some restrictions, obviously, that'll make it so that they don't harm the sales of their regular systems, but at the same time, they're still going to give the iPad a much more better functionality, which I think they could just switch around the iOS and how things are navigated on iOS and just make it better without having to have Mac OS on here. But hey, whatever, it's Apple. They're going to do what they do. Meantime, thanks so much for watching, guys, and staying tuned. Let me know what you thought or what you think about what they're going to do or not do, and we'll see how it all turns out in the end. See ya.